The first time I laughed at Sergeant Corran Wray, I was standing close enough to see the frost on his metal ribbons, and I did not know that I would spend the rest of my life ashamed of the sound. It was the morning of the Founders' Cup, and the drill range behind the east wall of Harrogate ran with a cold that got into the joints and stayed there. I was 19 years old. I had been a guardsman of the Royal House for 4 months and 11 days, which in my own head made me a soldier, and in the eyes of every man older than me made me a boy who had not yet learned to keep his mouth shut. The range was a long green trough between 2 stone walls, floored with cropped grass gone silver with rime, and at the far end stood the target butts. 10 of them, white paper faces on wooden frames, small as dinner plates at that distance, and getting smaller every time I let myself think about actually hitting one. I want to tell this the way it happened because I have told it wrong before. For years I told it as a story about a clever old man who fooled us all, as if the joke had been ours to enjoy and his to reveal. That is not the truth. The truth is that I mocked a better man than I will ever be, and he let me, and then he showed me what mockery costs the mocker and no one else. I am going to tell it that way now, while I still have the honesty to. The whole regiment had turned out. The Founders' Cup was the oldest competition the household kept, older than the treaty walls, older than the present line of kings, a marksmanship trial that had been shot every spring since a guardsman none of us could name had first put 10 balls through 10 marks to prove that the men who guarded the crown could do more than stand still and look decorative. There was a trophy, an ugly old thing of dark silver shaped like a powder horn, and there was the plaque. I will come to the plaque. For now, understand that on the morning I am describing, the Founders' Cup was not really about the trophy at all. It was about whether the old company would still exist by summer. They had told us that plainly at the muster the week before. The king's household was under review. There was a modernization board, and the board had opinions, and one of the opinions was that the Ceremonial Marksmanship Company, the old drill company, the one that still trained on the long antique rifles and the stances their grandfathers had used, was a museum piece the crown could no longer afford. The board wanted it folded into the regular guard, its traditions retired, its instructors pensioned, its range turned over to modern tactical work. The Founders' Cup this year would be watched by the board. If the old company shot well, it might buy itself another few years of life. If it shot poorly, the review would have all the proof it needed. I mention this because it explains why Lieutenant Cotto Ferris was so sure of himself, and why the rest of us wanted so badly to be on his side. Ferris was 26 and the best shot any of us had ever seen with our own eyes. He had come up through the modern side of the guard, trained on the new short carbines and the new doctrine, and he shot the way the new doctrine said a man should shoot square to the target, weight forward, both eyes open, quick and flat and lethal. He had won the cup 2 years running. He was tall and easy and good-looking in the way that makes younger men copy the set of a man's shoulders without meaning to, and that winter he had gathered a knot of us around him, junior guards, apprentices, the sons of officers who laughed when he laughed and repeated what he said as though we had thought of it. I was one of them. I am not proud of it, but I was one of them, and when Ferris strolled the length of the range that morning with his carbine slung and his breath smoking, I fell in behind him like the rest. "Watch the butts," he told us low, so it carried only to our little group. "They'll wheel out the antiques soon. You want to see how they shot before anyone knew what they were doing. Stay for the museum piece." He meant Sergeant Wray. I had seen Sergeant Wray perhaps a dozen times in 4 months, always at a distance, always in the same posture, a man of about 50, spare and gray, with a long straight back and a face that gave up nothing. He was quiet to the point of seeming half asleep, and he kept to the old company's end of the barracks, and the only thing I actually knew about him was that the other old sergeants, hard men who mocked everything, did not mock him. I had noticed that and had not thought about what it meant. 19-year-olds notice a great deal and think about almost none of it. Ferris shot first. Of course he did. The champion opened the cup. He walked to the firing line with that easy roll, planted himself square to the first butt, and put 10 rounds downrange in a little under a minute, crack, 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 steady as a clock. And when the range officers walked the marks and called the score, it was very good. Not perfect. 2 of his shots had drifted a hair wide in the cold. But it was a champion score, and his knot of us cheered, and I cheered loudest of all because I wanted him to notice me. He grinned and blew across the muzzle of his carbine like a man in a story, and the crowd along the walls clapped their gloved hands, and even the modernization board, 3 of them in their sober coats, up on the reviewing stand with the officers, nodded to one another as if a point had been made. Then they wheeled out the antiques, and Sergeant Corran Wray came to the line. He carried the old rifle the way you carry something you have carried 10,000 times, so that it seemed less a weapon than a part of the shape of him. It was a long thing, longer than anything the modern men used, dark wood and a browned barrel, with a set of iron sights so fine and small you wondered how any eye could use them. He set his feet, and when he set his feet, the whole range began, very quietly, to smile. Because Sergeant Wray did not stand square to the target like a modern man. He turned himself almost sideways to it, his left shoulder pointing down the range, his body a narrow line, his head canted over so his cheek lay along the stock in a way that looked painfully old-fashioned, like an engraving of a soldier from a century ago. His left elbow he braced hard against his ribs, tucked in under the rifle so that his whole left arm made a rigid post, and his right elbow he lifted high and level, winging out from his shoulder like, and this is the word Ferris used, loud enough to carry, so that it went down the line like a lit fuse, a scarecrow. "Look at it," Ferris said, delighted, not troubling to lower his voice now. "Look at that. That's how my grandfather's grandfather missed a barn. That's the museum, gentlemen. That's what we're paying to preserve." And I laughed. God help me, I laughed, and my laugh was one of a dozen, and the dozen became a general ripple of it up and down the range, the young men, the apprentices, some of the modern guards who should have known better, a low, ugly, pleased sound, the sound a crowd makes when it has decided together that a man is beneath it. Sergeant Wray stood in that strange sideways attitude with his cheek on the stock, and his high elbow winged out against the white sky, and he did not turn his head, and he did not answer, and he let us laugh. The old sergeants, I noticed later, did not laugh, nor did the oldest of the range officers, a white-haired man named Master Halden who ran the butts and had run them for 30 years. But I did not see that then. Then I saw only the scarecrow, and I heard only Ferris, and I wanted only to be counted among the men who were in on the joke. Master Halden lifted his flag. "Company Sergeant, 10 rounds, in your own time." We all expected that the old man would shoot and miss or hit poorly and shuffle off, and that the joke would be complete and the modern age would be confirmed and we could all go into the warm. That is what the morning had promised. That is what Ferris had promised us, the museum exposed. I settled in to enjoy it. Sergeant Wray took a breath and let half of it go, and became still in a way I had never seen a living man be still. I want to be careful here because this is the moment the story turns, and I have watched it turn 100 times in my memory, and I still do not entirely have words for it. It was not that he stopped moving. Ferris had stopped moving too before each shot, every marksman does. It was that the stillness seemed to come from somewhere much deeper in him, as if the sideways, scarecrow shape of him, the shape we had just laughed at, was not a pose at all but a foundation, a thing built to be motionless the way a bridge is built to bear weight. The high right elbow that had looked so absurd now looked like the top of an arch. The braced left arm was a pillar. His body had folded itself into a structure, and the structure did not tremble, did not drift, did not so much as breathe wrong. He fired. I did not see him decide to. There was no gathering, no visible squeeze, only the report, a deeper, older sound than Ferris's flat cracks, a full-throated bark that rolled off the stone walls and down at the butts, Master Halden's assistant lifted the red disc that meant a clean center hit. Dead center. The very middle of the first white plate. Someone near me stopped laughing. Sergeant Wray did not move to admire it. He did not blow across his muzzle. He worked the action of the old rifle with 2 economical motions, brought his cheek back to the stock, and the structure reassembled itself around him. The pillar, the arch, the narrow sideways line, and he fired again, and the red disc came up again at the second butt. Center. The range had gone quiet in patches now, quiet spreading outward from the firing line the way ripples spread, and into one of those quiet patches Lieutenant Ferris said, too loudly, "Cold barrel. First shot's always flatter. Watch him string them once he's warm." And a few of us laughed again, but the laugh was thinner now, and it died faster, because Sergeant Wray had already reloaded and settled and fired a third time, and the disc came up center, and a fourth, and the disc came up center, and by the fifth even Ferris had stopped talking. 5 shots, 5 discs, 5 dead centers at a range where a champion of the modern school had drifted 2 of 10. And the old man in the scarecrow stance had not changed his rhythm by a hair between the first and the fifth, had not sped up, had not slowed, had not shown by the smallest sign that he knew or cared that 400 people had fallen silent to watch him. I stopped feeling like a soldier watching a competition. I started feeling like a boy who had thrown a stone at something he had badly misjudged the size of. He had 5 shots left, and the whole range knew it, and the whole range had gone still, and up on the reviewing stand, one of the modernization board had risen halfway out of his seat without seeming to know he had done it. That was the moment, with the old rifle's smoke drifting sideways in the cold and the disc standing red at 5 butts and Sergeant Corran Wray settling once more into the shape we had mocked, that Master Halden, the old range officer, did something no one expected. He walked down from the butts to the firing line, and he stopped a respectful distance from the sergeant, and he took off his cap. He took off his cap in the cold on the range, while a shoot was in progress, and he held it against his chest and stood the way a man stands at a graveside, and I saw the oldest of the sergeants along the wall do the same. And I did not understand it, not yet, but I felt the understanding coming toward me like weather, and I felt the laugh I had laughed still hanging in the air around my own head, and for the first time in my 4 months and 11 days, I wished with everything in me that I could take a sound back out of the world. Sergeant Wray had 5 shots left. He fired the 6th, and the disc came up center, and Master Halden, bareheaded, said in a voice that carried the length of that silent range, "That's how he did it the first time, too." I did not know yet what he meant, but I was about to. To understand what happened on that range, to understand why an old range officer bared his head, and why the modernization board's man rose from his seat, and why the whole story of that morning would be told in the household for years afterward with a kind of hush. You have to understand the plaque, and you have to understand what the old company was, and you have to understand that I was standing in the middle of a legend I had been too ignorant to recognize. Let me go back a few days, to the muster where they told us the old company might be dissolved, because that is where I first heard the name that I would later learn belonged to the man I had just laughed at. The muster was held in the long hall, all of us packed in shoulder to shoulder, and the officer who addressed us was Colonel Bram Ashcroft, a heavy, decent man who plainly hated the words he had been given to say. He told us about the modernization board. He told us the Crown was under pressure to economize, that the old ways were being weighed against the new, that nothing was decided. And then he said the thing that started the trouble. The Ceremonial Marksmanship Company, he said, will demonstrate at the Founders' Cup. The board will judge whether the old discipline still earns its keep. I will be honest with you because you are soldiers and deserve honesty. The board has already half made up its mind. They have seen the modern scores. They have not seen anything from the old company that the modern company cannot do faster and cheaper. Unless the cup shows them something they do not expect, The old company will be retired at midsummer, and its traditions with it." There was a stir at that. The old company was small, a few dozen aging men who kept to themselves and trained in ways the rest of us thought quaint. Most of us did not much care whether it lived or died, but Colonel Ashcroft was not finished. "Some of you," he said, and his eye went, I would swear, toward the back of the hall where the old sergeant stood. "Some of you were not born when the old company last mattered to the crown in a way you would understand. You know it as the company that shoots the long rifles at the spring trial. You do not know what it was. So let me tell you one thing, and then I will let you go. 22 years ago, this house came within a breath of losing the king's own son. And the thing that stood between the boy and disaster was not a wall, and was not a squad, and was not the modern doctrine. It was one man of the old company, in the stance you will laugh at when you see it, making a shot the modern men said could not be made. So when the board asks whether the old discipline earns its keep, remember there is a prince alive today who is the answer. Dismissed." He said it plainly without drama, and then he stepped down, and the hall broke into the low roar of 200 men all talking at once, and in the noise I turned to the guardsman next to me, a fellow first-year named Pyatt, and asked him what the colonel had meant. Pyatt did not know. Nobody around us knew. It was old business before our time, and we were 19 and it was cold and there was supper. And by the time we reached the mess we had stopped wondering about it and started talking about the cup, and about Lieutenant Ferris, and about who would win. I did not connect the colonel's story to any living man. I heard one man of the old company, the way you hear a line from a ballad, as a figure, not a person, a hero worn smooth by retelling until he is no one you could actually meet. It did not occur to me that the hero of a 22-year-old story might be a specific gray sergeant who still drew his pay and slept in the old company's wing and would step to the firing line at the cup with his cheek on an antique stock. Heroes at 19 are a separate species. They are not the quiet men you pass in the corridor and do not trouble to nod to. So the muster ended and the week passed, and it was full of Ferris. He owned that week. He was the champion, the modern man, the one the board's decision would seem to vindicate, and he knew it, and he wore his knowing lightly and charmingly and everywhere. He drilled his little crew of us on the modern stance in the evenings, laughing, generous with his time, and we ate it up. "Square to the threat," he would say, tapping my boots wider apart with his own. "Wait into it. The old men shoot standing sideways like they're posing for a coin. You know why? Because the rifles they trained on kicked like a mule, and they had to brace against the recoil with half their body. It's a stance built for a weapon nobody's carried in 50 years. It's a fossil. You, though, you shoot square, you shoot fast, you shoot like it's this century. And I would set my feet square and shoot, and sometimes I would hit, and Ferris would clap me on the shoulder, and I would have walked into a wall for him. Once, only once, the old company came up while Ferris held court, and it is worth telling how, because it is the one warning I was given and did not heed. We were in the armory late, a half-dozen of us, cleaning our carbines under the lamps, and Ferris was in a fine mood, doing an impression of the old company's stance. The winged elbow, the sideways lean, the cheek laid over, and we were all laughing when old Master Halden came through on his round of the racks. Halden was not of the old company exactly. He was the range master, a fixture, a man who had watched 40 years of shooters come and go. He stopped, and he watched Ferris's impression for a moment with no expression at all, and then he said, "You've a fine eye, Lieutenant. Best I've seen in 20 years, maybe." Ferris preened, "Kind of you, Master Halden." "Best in 20 years, Halden said again, and let it sit, and then added, quiet as anything, "which tells you there was a better one 20 years back, and that you never met him, and that you do well not to mock a stance before you know what it was built to do." And he went on down the racks and left the armory colder than he'd found it. Ferris laughed it off, and we laughed with him, and I forgot it inside an hour. But Halden had told me plainly in that armory exactly what was coming. There was a better one 20 years back. He was telling us the hero of the colonel's story was not dead, not gone, not a ballad, that he was a man Halden had known, a man whose stance we were mocking. I heard it as an old man's grumbling. I was 19. I heard almost everything wrong that winter. Now let me carry you back to the range, to the sixth shot and the bared head and the words Master Halden spoke into the silence. That's how he did it the first time, too, because everything after them ran fast, and I want you to see it running. 6 discs stood red at 6 butts. Sergeant Corran Wray had 4 shots left. And the range, which 4 minutes earlier had been a place of laughter and easy contempt, had become something else entirely, a held breath 400 people long. The modernization board's man was fully on his feet now. Colonel Ashcroft, up on the stand, had leaned forward with both hands on the rail. And Lieutenant Ferris, who had promised us a museum, stood at the edge of the firing line with his handsome face gone slack and still, watching a 50-year-old man in a scarecrow stance do the thing Ferris had built his whole young life around, and do it better than Ferris had ever seen it done. I need to tell you what a clean center meant on that range, because if you do not shoot you will not feel it. The white plates at the butts were scored in rings, and the center ring, the eye, the old men called it, was a circle no wider than the mouth of a teacup, at a distance where a teacup was invisible to the naked eye. To put 1 round in the eye was a fine shot, the sort a man was pleased with. To put 2 in was a story he would tell. Ferris, the best any of us had seen, had put perhaps 4 of his 10 in the eye that morning and been rightly proud. Sergeant Wray had put 6 for 6, without hurry, without a single flyer, and had 4 still to go. And the arithmetic of it was so far outside what any of us had thought a human being could do that the mind simply refused it and kept trying to find the trick. "He's resting the barrel on something," someone behind me whispered. "He has to be." He was not. He was resting it on nothing but himself, on the pillar of his braced left arm and the arch of his high right elbow and the long line of his sideways body. The whole absurd, ancient architecture of the stance we had mocked, which I now understood with a slow horror, was not a fossil at all but a machine. A machine for holding a heavy rifle so perfectly, so utterly without tremor, that the man behind it could do this. Ferris had told us the stance was built to fight recoil from an old rifle. He had been half right, which is the most dangerous thing to be. The stance was built to fight everything. To fight the cold and the crowd and the breath and the beat of the shooter's own heart. It turned a man into a bridge, and a bridge does not flinch. Sergeant Wray settled. The structure assembled itself. He fired the 7th and the disc came up center, and Master Halden, still bareheaded, called the score up the range in the formal old words, "The eye clean." And there was a sound from the crowd, not a cheer, something lower and more astonished than a cheer. It was at the 7th shot that I finally understood I had done something I could not undo, and it was at the 7th shot that Lieutenant Ferris, to his lasting disgrace, decided he could still salvage the morning. He stepped forward. He put on the easy grin, though it did not sit right anymore, and he said, loud, pitching it for the crowd and the board, "7 fine shots, Sergeant, 7 fine shots, but this is the old parade trick, isn't it? Slow fire, no pressure all the time in the world, that's not shooting, that's whittling. Any man can whittle if you give him all day and a rest for his elbow." He turned to the reviewing stand, spreading his hands, playing to the board. "The modern soldier shoots under pressure, fast, moving. That's what the crown pays for, not a garden ornament that can hold still." It was a cruel thing to say and a stupid thing to say, and I saw, even at 19, even loyal as I was to him, that it was the wrong thing to say because a champion who has just been beaten and knows it should be silent, and Ferris was neither silent nor gracious, and every man on that range heard the fear under the words. But it landed on the board. I watched it land. One of the 3 sober men on the stand nodded slowly, as if Ferris had made a fair point, as if the whole matter really did come down to speed and pressure and the modern century. And I understood that Ferris had just found the one argument that could still lose the old company its life even after 6 clean shots. He had moved the goalposts, and the board was going to let him. And Sergeant Corran Wray, who had not spoken one word since he came to the line, straightened out of his stance and turned his head and looked at Lieutenant Ferris for the first time. I was close enough to see his eyes. They were pale and very calm, the eyes of a man who has been cold and afraid and steady in places none of us had been, and there was no anger in them at all, which was somehow worse than anger. He looked at Ferris the way you look at a boy who has said something he does not know is dangerous. Then he looked past Ferris to the reviewing stand, to Colonel Ashcroft, and he spoke 3 words, quiet, but the range was so silent that they carried to the walls. "Then move them." For a moment no one understood. Then Master Halden, down by the firing line, barked a short laugh, the first sound of pleasure anyone had made in minutes, and turned to the stand and called up, "The sergeant requests the moving butts, Colonel, with the board's permission. 3 remaining shots on the runners." I did not know then what the moving butts were. I learned in the next 60 seconds, along with the rest of my generation of guards, and it is worth explaining. Along the very back of the range, behind the fixed butts, ran a set of old iron rails, and on the rails were 3 target carriages that could be hauled across the range at speed by a rope and pulley team, a device from the old company's heyday, when they had trained men to hit a target that would not hold still. No one had used them in years. The modern range did not bother. The modern doctrine had its own methods. But the rails were still there, and the carriages were still there, and there were still old men on that range who knew how to work the ropes, and at Master Halden's word 4 of the oldest sergeants went to the pulley team without being asked twice, their faces lit like boys. "Sergeant," Colonel Ashcroft called down, and his voice was not quite steady, "you understand the board is watching. You do not have to do this." "I know it, Colonel," Sergeant Wray said. "That's why I'm doing it." And Lieutenant Ferris, who had asked for a target under pressure, who had asked for speed and movement, stood with his mouth slightly open, and the color draining out of his handsome face, because he had gotten exactly what he demanded and understood, 1 heartbeat too late, that he had demanded the death of his own argument. They ran the first carriage. It came across the far end of the range fast, the white plate jerking and bouncing on the old iron, a target no modern marksman I had ever watched would have taken with any confidence, a fleeting, rattling thing, there and gone. Sergeant Wray did not track it in the smooth modern way, swinging the whole body. He did something older and stranger. He set his stance the pillar, the arch, the sideways line aimed at a point of empty air ahead of the running target, and waited, motionless as the bridge he was, for the plate to run into his shot. And when it did, he fired, and the plate spun on its carriage, and Master Halden's assistant, running alongside, threw up the red disc, and even at that speed, even bouncing, the round had gone into the eye. The range came apart. That is the only way I can say it. 400 people who had been holding one long breath let it go at once in a roar that rolled off both stone walls and up into the white sky, and it was not a polite competition clap. It was the sound men make when they have seen something they will describe to their grandchildren, and I was roaring with them. I who had laughed. I was on my feet with my throat open and my eyes stinging in the cold, and beside me Pyatt was shouting again, again, and pounding my shoulder. And up on the stand Colonel Ashcroft had straightened to attention, as if a superior had entered the room. 2 carriages left, 2 shots left, and Sergeant Corran Wray, in the stance we had mocked, was already resetting. They ran the second carriage faster than the first. The old sergeants on the ropes had found their rhythm, and they hauled, and the plate came across in a white blur, jerking on the rails. And this time Master Halden, who was enjoying himself now in the grim way of a man watching justice done, called for them to run it the other direction, so that the target crossed from left to right, into the sergeant's blind side, the hardest line there is. Sergeant Wray did not so much as tighten. He set his air point, he became the bridge, he waited. And I watched him wait through a stretch of time that felt very long and was probably half a second, and he fired. And the plate rang like a struck bell and spun, and the disc came up center, and the roar came again, bigger, and this time it had a shape to it. This time 400 people were chanting a word, and the word was 10. Because they wanted the 10th, they were greedy for it. They had gone in the space of 6 minutes, from mocking this man to hungering for him to be perfect. 1 carriage left, 1 shot left. 9 clean centers behind him, 6 standing, 3, no, 2 on the run, forgive me. I have carried these numbers so long they blur. 9 clean centers, and 1 plate remaining. And Sergeant Corran Wray lowered the old rifle for a moment and stood up out of his stance and looked, not at the target, and not at Ferris, and not at the cheering crowd, but up at the reviewing stand where the modernization board sat. He looked at the 3 sober men who had come to decide whether his life's discipline was worth keeping. And then he did the thing that turned a fine morning into a legend. He called up to them in that quiet carrying voice, for the last one named the mark. The range hushed again, fast, the way a wave pulls back. "Sergeant," Colonel Ashcroft said. "The board came to judge whether the old discipline earns its keep," Sergeant Wray said. "Then let the board set the shot, any mark they choose at any speed. I'll not have it said the old company chose an easy one." He turned the old rifle in his hands once and waited, sideways to the range, gray and spare and utterly composed, and the 3 men of the modernization board looked at one another. And then the eldest of them, a lean, silver man named Provost Elias Renwick, who I would later learn had come to that range already certain the old ways were dead, leaned to Master Halden and said something. And Master Halden's weathered face did something complicated, and he turned and called the mark down the range. "The board sets the 10th shot," Halden cried. The near plate and the far plate on 2 carriages, crossing, and the sergeant to strike the far one only, through the gap as they pass. On the runners, fast. It was a wicked shot. I understood that much even in my ignorance. 2 targets would run across the range on separate rails, one nearer, one farther, crossing each other's paths so that for one flicker of time the near plate would pass in front of the far plate, and there would be a narrow gap of open air, a moving window through which, for less than a heartbeat, the far target could be struck. Miss the timing and you hit the near plate, the wrong plate, and fail. Take the shot early or late and you hit nothing. It was not a shot a man made on purpose. It was a shot a man was lucky to make once in a life by accident, and the board had chosen it precisely because it could not be made, because it would let them say, gently, that the old sergeant had done marvels, but that even marvels have limits and the century marches on. Provost Renwick sat back with the small, sad, satisfied expression of a reasonable man who has arranged to be proven right. And I looked at Lieutenant Ferris, and for the first time that morning I did not want to be standing near him, because his face had the same expression as Renwick's, the same relief, the same ugly hope that the old man would finally fail. And I saw Ferris for what he was, which was not a champion at all but a frightened young man who would rather the tradition die than admit it had beaten him. And something in me that had spent all winter walking behind him quietly turned around and walked the other way. They set the 2 carriages. The old sergeants took the ropes, 4 on each. Master Halden raised his flag and did not lower it, waiting for the sergeant. Sergeant Corran Wray settled into the stance one last time. The pillar, the arch, the long sideways line. His cheek came down along the old dark stock, and the whole architecture of him locked, and the range went so silent I could hear the rime crackling as the sun touched it, and the flags shifting on their poles. He aimed at nothing, at a patch of empty cold air out in the middle of the range where the gap would open, and he waited, and Master Halden's flag came down, and the sergeants heaved on the ropes. The 2 plates ran. They came across the range from opposite ends, the near one and the far one, closing on the crossing point, and my whole body clenched, and beside me Pyatt had stopped breathing, and the plates rushed toward each other, and the near one swept in front of the far one, and for one splinter of a second the gap of open air opened between them, that impossible window, there and gone, and in that splinter the old rifle spoke. The far plate rang. Not the near one, the far one. Clean through the gap, in the one instant it existed, the round found the eye of the farther target, and the plate leapt on its carriage, and Master Halden's assistant, sprinting, flung up the red disc. And for a moment the whole range simply could not react, could not make a sound, because what we had seen was not possible, and we all knew it was not possible, and we had all just seen it. Then it broke. I have been in crowds that cheered, and I have been in one crowd that did not so much cheer as come undone, and it was that range, that morning at the 10th shot. Men were shouting who I would have sworn had no shout in them. The old sergeants at the ropes had thrown them down and seized one another. Colonel Ashcroft was on his feet with his fist in the air like a boy. And I am not ashamed of this part. I was weeping, standing there in the cold, 19 years old, cheering my raw throat out for a man I had laughed at 6 minutes before, and I did not care who saw it. 10 shots, 10 clean centers, 6 standing, 3 on the run, and 1 through a gap in the air that the board itself had set, believing it could not be done. Sergeant Corran Wray stood up out of the scarecrow stance, and he did not smile, and he did not bow, and he did not look at the crowd. He worked the action of the old rifle to clear it, checked it with 2 calm motions, and grounded the butt on the frosted grass, and stood at ease beside it, and waited, as if he had all the time in the world, as if the roar of 400 people was whether he had stood through before, for the men on the stand to decide what they would now do. Because here is the thing I did not understand in my weeping and my cheering, and would only understand as the morning went on. The 10 shots had not settled anything. Not yet. The 10 shots had proven, past any argument, that the old discipline could do what the modern could not. But the modernization board had not come to that range to be persuaded by proof. They had come with a decision already made, and behind that decision, though none of us yet knew it, stood a will far harder and far colder than any provost's. A will that did not care what the old sergeant could do with a rifle, and cared very much that the old company be broken, and its loyal old men turned out. The 10 shots had changed everything about how we would remember that morning. Whether they had changed anything about the fate of the men who shot them was a question that would take the rest of the day, and would drag the king himself down to that range before it was answered. Provost Renwick rose. The range began raggedly to quiet, hoping for a word of surrender, a word of praise, the graceful thing, and Provost Renwick gave them none of it. A remarkable performance, he said, and his voice was dry and careful and carried the way a lawyer's carries. Truly remarkable. The sergeant is to be congratulated, but the board must consider more than a single morning's marksmanship. We are charged with the good governance of the household's resources. One man's extraordinary skill, and he inclined his head to Sergeant Wray coolly, does not of itself justify the expense of an entire company, its instructors, its range, and its traditions, when the same duties can be discharged by the modern establishment at a fraction of the cost. The board will render its judgment in due course. I thank you all. And he sat. The silence that followed, that was a different silence. It was the silence of 400 people who have just watched a miracle be filed away as an irrelevance. Master Halden broke it. He crossed to Sergeant Wray, and he did not say anything at first, only put his hand on the old man's shoulder and left it there, and then he bent and picked up the sergeant's cap from where it had fallen and set it back into his hands. And then he turned and looked up at the emptying stand where Provost Renwick was gathering his coat, and he said, not loudly, but into the quiet so that it reached, "You set him a shot no man alive could make, and he made it, and you'll still put him out to grass. There was a time, Provost, when this house knew the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. I served under that time. I'm sorry you didn't." Renwick did not answer. He went down the back of the stand and away, and the 2 other boardmen went with him, and the morning that had felt for 6 shining minutes like a triumph curdled into something heavier and more familiar. The old, sour taste of watching the reasonable and the powerful agree to do a mean thing slowly, in good order, with regret. The crowd began to break up. Sergeant Ray handed the old rifle to Master Halden, and the two of them walked off toward the old company's wing without a word to anyone, and I stood in the thinning crowd with the tears drying cold on my face and a feeling in my chest I did not have a name for, and I made a decision that surprised me. I decided I would find out. All of it. Who he was, and what the colonel had meant at the muster, and why an old range master would bare his head on a live range, and why the board would put out to grass a man who could shoot through a gap in the air. I did not know yet that finding out would take me the rest of that long day, or that the finding out would change the shape of my whole life. I only knew I could not go back to the mess and eat my supper and talk about Ferris as if nothing had happened. Something had happened. I meant to understand it. I started with the plaque. It hung in the range house in the low room where the scorebooks were kept, a slab of dark bronze gone green in the letters, and I had passed it 100 times without reading it. Now I read it. It listed the winners of the Founders' Cup going back further than I could easily count, name after name after name, and against most of the years there was a score, and the scores were good, championship scores, the kind Ferris posted. And then against one year, 22 years back, there was no name at all. There was a blank where a name should be, and beside the blank a single word cut deeper than the rest, withheld, and beside that a score. The score was 10. Not 10 of 10, the way the others were written. Just 10. 10 clean, and under it in smaller letters a line I read 3 times before it went in. For a service the Crown has asked us not to name by a man who has asked us not to name him. The cup is his. He would not take it. I was standing there with my finger on the cold bronze when Master Halden came in behind me. He did not seem surprised to find me there. I think, looking back, that he had half expected one of us young fools to come looking, and had come to the range house to be found. "You read it," he said. "I don't understand it," I said. "There's no name." "No," Halden said. "There's no name." He came and stood beside me and looked at the plaque the way you look at the grave of a friend. 22 years ago, the Crown had an enemy. I'll not tell you the whole of it, because half of it is still not mine to tell and the other half you're too young to carry well. But there was an enemy and there was a day, and on that day the king's son, the boy who is now the Crown Prince, though he was a child of 6 then, was where he should not have been, in the open, with the wrong people near him, and a thing began to happen very fast that a wall could not have stopped and a squad could not have reached in time. There was one man near enough. One man of the old company off duty with an old rifle he'd been cleaning, in the stance you laughed at this morning. And he made a shot across a distance, and through a crowd that the modern instructors of the day swore before the king's own council could not be made, not safely, not without striking the innocent, not at all. He made it. He did what had to be done, and he touched no one he should not have touched, and the boy lived and is alive today, and will be your king when Alaric is gone. And that man would not put his name to it, would not take the cup, would not take the honor, would not have it spoken of. He said, Halden's voice roughened, he said a marksman's finest shot is the one that no one ever has to know he took. So the Crown withheld the name at his asking and wrote withheld and the score and let the rest be silence. That's the plaque, lad. That's what you laughed at this morning. I had known, I think, before he said it. I had known since the 6th shot, since he bared his head. But knowing a thing and having it said out loud are different, and when Halden said it, I had to put my hand flat against the wall. "Sergeant Ray," I said. "Sergeant Corran Wray," said Halden, "who has stood a post in this house for 29 years and asked nothing and been given nothing, and would tell you if you asked him that he is exactly what he wants to be, which is a guardsman, and who your Lieutenant Ferris called a scarecrow in front of 400 men this morning. I ask the question then that I am still, all these years later, a little proud of asking, because it was the first grown thing I said that whole winter. I asked, "Then why is the board putting the old company down? If they know what he did, if the crown knows, why let it die?" And Master Halden's face changed. The grief went out of it, and something warier and angrier came in, and he looked at the door and lowered his voice, and I understood that I had walked, without meaning to, into the part of the story that was dangerous. "That," he said, "is a better question than you know to ask. Sit down. There's more to this morning than an old man and a rifle, and if you're going to go asking it aloud, you'd best know where the walls have ears." What Master Halden told me in the range house, lo, with the door watched, I will set down plainly, because it is the hinge on which everything else turned. The modernization board was real. The pressure to economize was real. But the decision to single out the old company, to weigh it first, to weigh it hardest, to send Provost Renwick with his mind half made up, that had not come from the board. It had come from above the board. It had come from the Queen Consort's household. I did not, at 19, know much of Queen Consort Morwenna beyond her face on the coins and her carriage in the processions. I knew she was the king's second wife, that the Crown Prince Rowan was not her son but the son of the late Queen Isolde, and that there was, in the way the older servants spoke of her, a carefulness that I had not thought to wonder about. Halden filled in the rest, or enough of it. Morwenna had a son of her own, Lord Cassius, and an ambition for him that had no natural room in a house where the succession ran through Rowan and had run through Isolde before him. And the old company, the Ceremonial Marksmanship Company, the little band of aging men in their unfashionable wing, was, Halden said, the last stubborn knot of the old Queen's people left in the household. They had been Isolde's. They had guarded her and her son, and they were loyal to the late Queen's line down to the marrow, and every one of them, if you put it to him, would put himself between Rowan and any harm without a half-second's thought. Morwenna knew it. And Morwenna wanted them gone, pensioned, scattered, their wing emptied, their loyalty dissolved into the anonymous mass of the modern guard where it could be posted far from the prince and forgotten. And the modernization board, with its reasonable language about cost and century, was the clean and bloodless instrument she had chosen to do it. The cup was meant to be the excuse, Halden said. They meant the old company to shoot its little demonstration and shoot it middling, the way a company of tired old men in their 50s might, and then the board would say, sadly, that the discipline had had its day, and it would be done, and it would look like nobody's fault. Renwick's an honest fool, he truly believes the ledger. He doesn't know he's her knife. But she knows. He looked at me. What she did not plan for, lad, was that Corran Wray would step to that line and shoot the way he shot 22 years ago, and remind 400 witnesses and one modernization board, and the whole household what the old company is. That's why Renwick was so quick and so cold at the end. He'd been told to get a result. He came with the result already written. And now he's got to deliver it over the top of the finest shooting any of those men will see in their lives, in front of everyone, and he knows how that looks, and he doesn't care, because the order came from a place he can't refuse. Halden stood. That's your morning, boy. Now you know it. Do something useful with it or forget it, but don't you dare laugh again. I went out of the range house into the cold with my head full of things too big for it. And I did the only useful thing I could think of, which was to go and find the sergeant himself. The old company's wing was a low, plain stone building at the far end of the barracks, older than the rest, with narrow windows and a smell of oil and cold iron and pipe smoke. I had never been inside it. A first-year guard of the modern establishment had no business there, and I stood in the doorway a while working up the courage, and I would not have gone in at all if one of the old sergeants, passing with an armful of firewood, had not looked at me and jerked his chin down the passage and said, "He's in the drill room if you're looking for him. Most of you lot are today." There was no warmth in how he said it, but there was no ice either. He had seen me cheering, maybe, or he had seen me laughing. Either way, he let me by. The drill room was a long bare hall with a wooden floor worn pale by generations of feet, and Sergeant Corran Wray was alone in it, in his shirt sleeves, cleaning the old rifle by the light of a single high window. He had it broken down on a strip of felt on the table, each part laid out in its order, and he was drawing a cloth through the barrel with the slow, unhurried attention of a man who found the work restful. He did not look up when I came in, but he knew I was there. Men like him always know. "Sergeant," I said, and then did not know how to go on. He drew the cloth through and inspected it and set it down. "You're one of Ferris's," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a fact stated so I would know he knew it. "I was," I said. "This morning I was." And then, because I had come to do a thing and there was no way to do it but plainly, I said, "I laughed at your stance, Sergeant, on the range. When you set your feet, I laughed, and I want to tell you I'm ashamed of it and I'm sorry." He looked at me then, those pale, calm eyes taking their time. "A good many men laughed," he said. "You're the first to walk down here and say so. Why did you?" I thought he meant why did I laugh, and I started to stammer some excuse about Ferris and being new and not knowing, and he stopped me with a small motion of his hand. "No," he said. "Why did you come down here and say so? The laughing's easy to understand. Everyone does the easy thing in a crowd. Coming down here alone to a wing you've no business in, to tell an old man you were wrong, that's the harder thing. And I'd like to know why you did it, because it'll tell me whether you're worth the answer to the question you came to ask." I had not known I had a question until he said it, and then I found I did, and it came out of me all at once. "Because I don't understand how you can be that, what you are, and let us laugh and not say a word, and then shoot like that and still let them stand up there and put your company down as if it never happened and just walk away and clean your rifle. I don't understand it, Sergeant. If I could shoot like you, I'd have thrown it in their faces. And you didn't. You didn't even change your face. And I want to know how a man gets to be like that, because I don't think I ever will, and I think maybe I ought to want to." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he gestured to the bench along the wall, and I sat, and he went back to laying out the parts of the rifle, and he told me in his own time, in the plain, unhurried way of a man who did not waste words, the thing I had come to hear. "I didn't build this stance," he said. "A man named Marksmaster Orrin built it, or rather he inherited it from the men before him and taught it to me when I was younger than you and twice as foolish. It's older than the house. It looks the way it looks because it was made in a time when a rifle was heavy and slow, and a man got one shot and had to make it, and everything about it. The sideways line, the braced arm, the high elbow you all think is so funny. Every part of it is there to do one thing, which is to take the man out of the shot, to make the rifle steady in spite of the man behind it. Because a man shakes, lad. A man breathes and his heart beats and his hands are warm and alive, and every living thing about him wants to move, and a shot at distance forgives none of it. The modern stance fights the man's shaking with speed. Get the shot off before the shake matters. The old stance does something harder. It builds the man into a structure that doesn't shake. It takes 20 years to learn, and it's ugly and it's slow, and there's nothing in the modern century that rewards it, and it is the finest thing I know how to do, and this morning 400 men laughed at it, including you." He said it without heat. "That's the how of the stance. You asked me a harder thing than that, though. You asked how a man gets to be able to let them laugh. That's a different lesson, and Orrin taught me that one too, though he didn't mean to." He picked up the barrel and sighted down it at the window light. "When I was your age, I could shoot better than anyone in the company, better than Orrin, and I knew it, and I wanted everyone else to know it, and I was Ferris, lad. I was exactly Ferris. I won things, and I blew across my muzzle, and I mocked the men who couldn't do what I could do, and I thought that skill was the same as worth, and that a man who could put 10 in the eye was a better man than one who couldn't. And then there came a day, and here his voice did not change at all, which was how I knew it cost him. There came a day when the skill was needed, truly needed, when there was a life on the end of it, a small life, and everything I'd won and blown across my muzzle about didn't matter one grain. Only the shot mattered. And I made it. And a boy lived. And afterward the king wanted to give me the cup and honors and a name in bronze, and I found I could not take any of it, and it took me years to understand why. And the why is the only thing I know worth teaching, so I'll give it to you and you can do what you like with it. The shot was the smallest part of it. The years of standing in the ugly stance in the cold when no one was watching and no one cared and there was nothing to win, that was the thing that made the shot. The shot was just the day the account came due. And there is no glory in it because glory is loud and this was silent, and a man who does a silent thing for a loud reason has spoiled it. So I withheld my name, not out of modesty. Out of understanding that the finest shot I ever made was worth exactly nothing to me if I made it to be seen making it. And after that, I could not go back to blowing across my muzzle. I'd tasted the real thing, and the real thing is done in the dark, for no reward, and it ruins you for the applause. So when a boy laughs at my stance now, he looked at me. I feel nothing but a little sorrow because I know what he doesn't, which is that the laughing is the loud, easy thing, and the standing still is the quiet, hard thing, and he has years of cold ahead of him before he'll understand the difference, if he ever does. That's how a man lets them laugh, lad. He lets them laugh because he pities them the lesson they haven't learned yet. I sat on that bench in the cold drill room and I did not say anything for a long time because there was nothing in me equal to what he had just handed me. Finally, I said the only thing I had, which was, "They're going to put the company down anyway. Master Halden told me. It's the queen consort, she wants you gone, all of you, because you were the old queens, because you'd stand for the prince. The board is just her." I stopped, not sure how much I was allowed to know aloud. "Her knife," Ray said. "Yes. I know it." He said it without surprise, and I realized he had known it all along, had known it before he ever stepped to the line, had known that the whole demonstration was rigged, the ending written, his company sold before the first shot. He had known, and he had shot anyway, and shot as if it mattered, because to him it had mattered in the only way that had ever mattered to him. It was the true thing, done well, whether or not it was seen or rewarded. "Then why?" I began. "Because a man does the true thing whether or not it saves him," he said. "I did not shoot to change the board's mind. I shot because it was the Founder's Cup and my company was watching, and it was the last time we might ever fire the old rifles on that range, and I would not have the last time be a poor one. If they put us down, they put us down. I've stood a good post, so have my men." He began methodically to reassemble the rifle. "But you're wrong about one thing, and it's a thing worth being right about. You think the morning is over. You think Renwick stood up and had the last word and that's the end. It isn't. There's a part of this the queen consort couldn't write, and it's the part that's going to matter, and it's got nothing to do with me." "What part?" He slid the barrel home and locked it, and for the first time all day something that was almost a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "The boy I made the shot for," he said, "is 28 years old now, and he is not a boy who forgets, and word travels through a house faster than any board can render a judgment. Renwick may have had the last word on that range, but there is a man in this house whose whole life is a debt to the old company, and no one thought to ask him what he thinks, and I have a notion," he stood and reached for his tunic, "that someone is about to." He did not say the name. He did not have to. Even I, 4 months and 11 days a guardsman, knew who the boy of 6 had grown into. And as if the house itself had been listening, that was the moment a runner came pounding down the passage of the old wing, a breathless young page in the royal livery, who checked at the drill room door and looked at the gray sergeant in his shirt sleeves and blurted the thing that turned the whole day over one final time. "Sergeant Ray, Sergeant Corran Wray, you're summoned, all of you. The whole company, to the range at once. The crown prince is coming down, and the boy swallowed, and the king is coming with him." The false dawn, if you want to call it that, had been the moment I stood at the plaque and understood that the miracle had already been filed away, and that reason and power had agreed to let a good thing die quietly. That was the bottom of the day, the point where it looked most surely lost. What the page's message meant, what it turned the day into, I did not yet grasp. I only knew that Sergeant Wray took his tunic off its peg and shrugged into it, and did up the brass buttons one by one with those steady hands, and settled the collar, and became once more the immaculate, unreadable soldier we had laughed at that morning. And then he looked at me, a first-year guard with no business in that wing, and he said the thing I have tried to be worthy of ever since. "Come along then," he said. "You wanted to understand it, come and watch the rest." The range had not emptied after all. Word of the summons had run through the barracks faster than any of us could walk, and by the time the old company formed up on the frosted grass, 36 gray men in their long, unfashionable coats, straight-backed, the antique rifles grounded at their sides. The walls were lined 3 deep again, and more coming, the whole household drawn to the range by the one thing a household cannot resist, which is the sense that something is about to happen that will be talked about for years. Lieutenant Ferris was there, near the reviewing stand, and Provost Renwick was there, plainly summoned and plainly uneasy, his 2 fellow board men beside him, and Master Halden stood by the firing line with his cap in his hands. And I stood where a first year had no business standing, at the end of the old company's line, because Sergeant Wray had brought me, and no one had the will to send me away. Then the king came. I had seen King Alaric before only at a great distance, on a balcony, a small crowned figure to be cheered at. To see him come onto the range on foot, in a plain dark riding coat with his breath smoking like any man's, was a different thing, and the whole assembly went down into silence and salute as he came. He was older than I had imagined, gray at the temples, with a lined, tired, watchful face, and beside him, half a head taller, came a younger man I knew at once must be the Crown Prince Rowan, dark-haired, grave, moving with the coiled quickness of a man who had been a soldier himself. And behind them, unbidden and unwelcome, in a fur-collared coat with her chin high and her mouth set in a careful line, came the Queen Consort Morwenna, who had not been summoned, and who had come anyway because she had understood, as I had not, exactly how much danger there suddenly was in her clever bloodless plan. The king stopped before the old company. His eyes went down the gray line, slowly, man by man, and there was something in his face that I could not read then and can read now, the look of a man seeing, all at once, people he had let himself forget. His gaze reached Sergeant Wray, in the middle of the line, and stopped. It was the Crown Prince who spoke first. He did not stand on ceremony. He walked out ahead of his father, straight to Sergeant Wray, and he stopped in front of him, and for a long moment the 2 men only looked at each other, the grave young prince and the gray old sergeant. And then Prince Rowan said, in a voice pitched to carry to every soul on that range, "I was told this morning that a man of the old company shot 10 clean centers at the Founder's Cup. 6 standing, 3 on the runners, and 1 through a crossing gap the board set to be impossible." He paused. "I was told he does it in a sideways stance that the young men laughed at, and when I heard that the 10 clean, the impossible 10th, the stance, I did not need to be told the man's name. I have wondered my whole life whether I would ever be allowed to learn it. Sergeant." His voice thickened, and he did not fight it. "Was it you, 22 years ago, the shot the Crown withheld the name for? The shot that is the reason I am standing on this grass, was it you?" The range did not breathe. Every eye on that field went to Corran Wray, and I saw the old sergeant's jaw work once, and I understood the war in him, that he had kept this silence for 22 years, had built his whole peace upon it, had told me not 2 hours before that a marksman's finest shot is the one no one ever has to know he took. To answer was to break the thing that had made him who he was. To refuse was to let his company die for the want of a word. He looked at the prince, and then, quietly, he did the thing that cost him more than the 10th shot had cost him. "It was me, your highness," he said. The sound that went through the assembly was not a cheer. It was lower and stranger than a cheer, a long exhalation, a sound of hundreds of people having a legend turn in front of them, into a living man they could have passed in a corridor. And the Crown Prince Rowan, heir to the throne of that house, did a thing that I have never forgotten, and that I do not think the house has forgotten either. He came to attention before the old sergeant, and he saluted him, the prince saluting the guard, and he held the salute, and he said, loud and clear and shaking, "Then I have owed you my whole life a debt I did not know how to pay, because you would not let it be paid, because you would not be named. I name you now, Sergeant Corran Wray, before the king and the household and every man who laughed at you this morning. You are the man who saved the king's son, and I will not stand on this earth and watch your company put down for the price of a ledger while I have breath to prevent it." He turned then, still holding his father's people in that terrible attentive silence, and he looked at Provost Renwick, and his voice went cold. "You set him the crossing shot," he said. "You said it to be impossible. Why?" Renwick, to his small credit, did not lie. He was an honest fool, Haldon had said, and in that moment his honesty was the undoing of the thing he had been made an instrument of. "Your Highness," he said, "the board was charged to weigh the old company's worth against its cost. I set a hard shot to test the limit of the discipline. I did not know," and here his eyes went helplessly before he could stop them to the queen consort where she stood in her fur collar. "I was given to understand that the review's conclusion was expected, that the economy was—" he stopped. But the glance had been enough. Every soul on that range had seen where his eyes had gone, and the silence changed its character and became a silence with a direction to it, and the direction was Morwenna. King Alaric, who had not yet spoken, spoke now. He had been watching all of it, the prince's salute, the sergeant's confession, the provost's fatal glance with that lined, tired, watchful face, and when he spoke his voice was quiet and it fell on the range like a stone into a well. "Expected," he repeated. The conclusion was expected. He turned slowly to his wife. "Madam, the provost seems to believe the outcome of an independent review was settled before it began. I confess I am curious how he came by that belief. Perhaps you can help him." I will not pretend I understood, at 19, all the currents that ran under what happened next. I have had years to learn them since, and the house being what it is, some of it will never be fully told. But I saw the queen consort Morwenna's face, and I saw it do the thing that a face does when a plan built entirely on never being seen is seen, all at once, by everyone who matters. She was too able a woman to show fear. What she showed instead was a cold, swift recalculation, and then a smooth denial. "I am sure I have no idea what the provost imagines, my lord. The economies of the household are hardly my concern." And it was a good denial, delivered well, and it might have held on any other morning. But this was not any other morning. This was the morning Corran Wray had shot 10 clean centers and been named at last, and the whole household stood on that range with its blood up and its eyes open, primed as it had never been primed to see clearly, and Morwenna's misfortune was that she had chosen, of all the days in the year, this one, to be caught. The king looked at her a long moment, and something passed over his tired face, not surprise, I thought, but the tired confirmation of a thing long suspected, and he said, gently, which was worse than anger, "We will speak of your concerns later, madam, privately, at length." And Morwenna, who understood exactly what those words meant, and what the coming weeks would cost her, inclined her head a bare degree and said no more. And I watched a scheme that had taken months to build die on the frost in the space of a single sentence, killed not by a shot, but by the truth arriving in a room too full of witnesses to be managed. Then the king turned back to the old company, and to Sergeant Wray, and the tiredness in his face gave way to something else. He walked the last few steps to the old sergeant himself, and he looked at him, and he said, in a voice meant for the whole range to hear, 22 years ago I was told a man of my guard had done an impossible thing and saved my son, and I was told the man would not be named, and I honored his wish though it grieved me, because a man who does such a thing has earned the right to ask even that of his king. For 22 years I have not known which of my guardsmen to thank when I looked at my son alive. This morning you made me a gift far greater than the shot, Sergeant, though you did not mean to. You let yourself be seen. And now I may do the thing I have wanted to do for 22 years, which is to say to your face, thank you, for my son, for your silence. For your 29 years of standing a cold post and asking nothing, thank you. And King Alaric, before the whole assembled household, took off his own hat to Corran Wray, the way Master Haldon had done on the range that morning, and stood bareheaded before the guard in the cold. I have been at some grand moments since in a long life of service, but I have never again seen anything like a king standing bareheaded before a sergeant on a frosted range, and I do not expect to. Sergeant Wray, who had let 400 men laugh at him without a flicker, could not stand quite steady under that. His jaw worked, and his eyes were bright, and he came to attention with a snap that rang, and he said in a voice that only just held, I did my duty, sire, nothing more. Any man of this company would have done the same. That's the whole of what the old company is, men who will do the true thing whether or not anyone ever knows. That's all it ever was. That's all we ask to be allowed to go on being. The king put his hat back on. You will be allowed, he said, and he turned so that his next words fell on Provost Renwick and on the whole assembly. Hear me. The Ceremonial Marksmanship Company is not to be dissolved. Not at midsummer, not ever by any board on any economy in my reign or my son's after me. Let it be entered so. Its range is preserved. Its instructors are confirmed. Its discipline is to be taught to the young men of this household as a first honor and not a museum piece. And I will have it understood in every barracks of my guard that the stance some of them laughed at this morning is the stance that once stood between this crown and ruin, and that a guardsman who cannot shoot the old way will not be thought a modern soldier but an unfinished one. He let that land. Then more quietly to Renwick, the board's review is concluded, Provost. You may tell it so. You were an honest man given a dishonest errand, and I do not hold the errand against you, but I would have you remember, next time you are asked to price a thing, that there are things in this house that cannot be weighed on a ledger, and that a man who forgets it makes himself a tool for those who have not forgotten it at all. They have only decided it does not matter to them. Go home. Think on it. Renwick bowed low and went, and I never saw him again, and I have always hoped he thought on it. That left Lieutenant Ferris. The king did not address him. That was the cruelest part, and I do not think it was cruelty, only that a king has no time to spend on a young man's disgrace when a company's life has just been saved. But the Crown Prince Rowan had not forgotten him. As the assembly began slowly to loosen and murmur and come back to itself, Prince Rowan crossed to where Ferris stood, gray-faced, by the stand, and he stopped in front of him, and though he did not raise his voice, those of us near enough heard every word. You are the champion, the prince said. Twice over, I'm told. The best shot in the modern establishment, I believe it. I've seen your scores. And this morning you stood on a range and called that man a scarecrow and a garden ornament and a museum piece in front of 400 men, and when he had answered you past all argument you moved the mark and tried to have him fail, so that your pride might survive. He studied Ferris a moment. A man may be a fine shot and a small man both. You've proven it. Here is what I will tell you, and you may make of it what you can. Skill is not honor. Skill is a tool, and a tool in a small man's hand does small work. That sergeant has more honor in the way he grounds his rifle than you have shown in 2 years of winning cups, and until you understand why, all your scores are just noise on a cold morning. You will apologize to him, not for my sake and not for the crown's, for your own, because until you can, you will never be the thing you so badly want to be thought. And he left him there. I watched Ferris cross that range. It was the hardest walk I ever saw a man make, harder than the sergeant's confession, because the sergeant had walked toward a truth, and Ferris was walking toward his own smallness with the whole household watching. Stopped in front of Sergeant Wray. He tried twice to speak before it came, and what he finally said was not smooth or graceful, and that was how I knew it was real. I called you names I hadn't earned the right to say, Ferris said. I've spent my whole life on this, and I've never seen anything like what you did today, and I couldn't stand it, and I made it your fault. I'm ashamed. If you'd ever be willing to show me the stance, Sergeant, I'd be honored to be taught. That's all, I'm sorry." And Sergeant Corran Wray, who owed him nothing, looked at the young champion a long moment, and I saw in the old man's face the thing he had told me in the drill room, that when a boy laughs at his stance he feels nothing but a little sorrow, because he knows what the boy doesn't. And he put out his hand, and Ferris took it, and Wray said, "Come to the range at dawn, Lieutenant. Bring patience. It takes 20 years and you've wasted 2 of them, so we'd best start now." Which was as close to grace as a hard old man comes, and it was enough, and I saw something in Ferris's ruined face begin, painfully, to mend. "There is one thing more, and then I am done." When the king and the prince had gone and the assembly had begun to thin, Master Halden came out of the range house carrying the ugly dark silver trophy, the powder-horn cup, and he brought it to Sergeant Wray, and he held it out, and the old sergeants of the company gathered close, and Halden said, 22 years ago you wouldn't take it. You'd earned it and you left the plaque blank and you walked away, and I've kept it on the shelf and cleaned it every spring and hated the blank ever since. You've been named now, Corran, whether you willed it or no. The whole house knows. There's no silence left to keep. Take the cup. It's yours twice over. Take it." And I thought he would. After everything, the naming, the king's bare head, the prince's salute, I thought surely now he would take it. But Corran Wray looked at the old trophy a long moment, and then he looked at the ranked gray men of his company, the men who had stood cold posts beside him for 20 and 30 years and asked nothing, and he shook his head once, and he said the thing that I have tried, and mostly failed, and never stopped trying, to live up to in all the years since. "No," he said, "not for me. The shot was never mine, Halden, not the one this morning and not the one 22 years ago. It was theirs." He nodded to his company. "It was Oren's who taught me, and it's every cold dawn every one of these men has stood when there was nothing to win and no one watching. I only happened to be the one holding the rifle on the day the account came due. Put it back on the shelf. But this time," and here at last the corner of his mouth moved, "this time don't leave the plaque blank. Cut the company's name in it. Not mine, the company's. Let it say the old discipline held. That's the only name that shot ever belonged to." So they did. If you go to that range house today, it is still there. It will always be there now. You will find the plaque, and against that year 22 years back the blank is filled at last, not with a man's name but with the company's, and against this year, the year I am telling you of, there is the same. The old discipline held. And a score, 10 clean, and beneath it, in the smaller letters, a line that Master Halden cut himself and that I have stood in front of more times than I can count. They laughed at the stance. Then they learned what it was for. I am an old man now myself. I stayed in the guard my whole life. I never wanted anything else after that morning. I learned the old stance. It took me a great deal longer than 20 years to be any good at it, and I never came within a country mile of what Corran Wray could do, and that is exactly as it should be. I stood cold posts where no one was watching. I taught the stance, when I was old enough to be trusted with it, to young men who laughed at it the way I once laughed, and I let them laugh, and I felt the little sorrow, and most of them came around in time. Sergeant Wray lived to be very old and died in his bed in the old wing with his men around him, and the crown prince, the king, by then, came to stand a while beside him at the end, bareheaded, and that is a thing the house still tells. People ask me sometimes when they hear I was there, what it was really like, the 10 shots, the 10th through the gap, the king's bare head, and I tell them the shots because that is what they want. But the truth is that the shots were the smallest part of it, exactly as he told me they would be. The thing that changed everything on that range was not the 10 centers. 10 centers only proved a skill. What changed everything was a man who had been mocked by 400 people standing perfectly, patiently still inside their laughter, because he knew something they did not, that the stance they were laughing at had been built, over centuries in the cold, for no reward, to do one quiet and enormous thing, and that a life could be built the same way, and that such a life will not be moved by laughter, or by cost, or by clever schemes in fur collars, or by anything at all except the moment the account comes due, and a true thing must be done. They mocked the stance, then 10 shots changed everything. But the 10 shots did not change the man. The man had already, long before, in a cold no one saw, become the kind of man who could make them. That was the lesson, and it was the finest one I was ever given, and I had to laugh at a better man than myself to earn it. I have spent my life hoping to pass it on without the laughing. This is my best attempt. Stand still. Do the true thing. Let them laugh. The account comes due for all of us, and on that day the only thing that will answer is what you built in the dark, when no one was watching and there was nothing at all to win.